today we actually have two rather long chapters that we're going to try to get through. So we'll do multiple dialogues and the ui.Dialog class method first, and then after the break we'll go and look a little bit more about styles. The idea of multiple dialogues is they're going to be able to handle different parts of a form simultaneously. So one of the things that happened as we moved into what we call the modern app era is people didn't want to have to move from dialogue to dialogue every time they wanted to do an action. They wanted to have the ability to just move between the different dialogues that were present out there on a form. So with multiple dialogues, we give you that capability to have your display fields, your input fields, your query by examples, action views, everything active and live at one time. And the way we do this is we take what we called our singular dialogues, our traditional dialogues, the input, the display array, the input array, and the construct, and we've created a mechanism that allows you to work on these in parallel. So on this slide, it's showing you a form, a multiple dialogue form, and on this form we have what we traditionally think of as, you know, an input. We have 3 tabs set up. We have a table down here, which is an input array. And these are active at the same time. So in what I would call the old style of application, I could be on this tab. If I wanted to go into my items, I would have to click a button that said items to bring me into these item tab. Here I can just navigate between the two. They're both active at the same time, and we have mechanisms that allow me to move between one and the other and move between these without having to leave one dialogue and enter into another. So the way we do this is we do this through a dialog block. It begins with the dialog keyword and has an end dialog keyword. And inside of the dialog block, you can have your attributes, you can have your record input, your construct, your display array, and your input array. And then we also have a series of dialog control blocks. So you'll have the ability to do a before dialog, after dialog. You can do your on actions, your on idles, and your commands. And when you do these dialog control blocks, they're not inside of these individuals. They're for the entire dialog. We'll, of course, see some examples of this as we go forward. So these are the steps that we use when we are creating a multiple dialogue. So the first thing we do is we go ahead and we create our form with screen arrays and screen records. So you would have your tables on the form. You'd have your fields put out there on the form. Then step 2 is we define our program variables and our records and arrays that are going to map to those screen records and those screen arrays. Next thing in our code is we open and display the form. Then we have to go and fill those program variables with data. And when we're filling them with data, that's going to be mapping them out to the screen arrays. And then we implement our dialog instructions. We define our subdialogs, so we're going to put in our displays, our inserts, our displays, and our input, our display arrays and our input arrays. We add then control behavior with our control blocks, and these control blocks can be both at the dialog level and they can be inside of the subdialog level. We can add actions at the dialog level and at the subdialog level. We'll show you the ways that you can then reference an action, whether it's at a dialog level or at a subdialog level. And then the last thing we have to do is we have to explicitly end the dialogue. So unlike our singular dialogues where you always had your OK and your cancel, your accept and your cancel, with a dialog statement, you're going to have to provide us with an on-action close or an on-action accept or an on-action cancel if you ever hope to get out of the dialogue. And then when you have these on-action statements, either a close, accept, or cancel, you can tell us then to either accept the dialogue or you can tell us to exit the dialogue. So these are the programming steps. We're going to take you through and show you examples of these as we move forward. So here's a very simple example, one that you'll be doing in your lab exercise, but you can see that we have two display arrays out here. We have, let me grab my pen. We have the first display array displaying to the screen record 1. We have a second display array displaying to screen record 2. And these are going to be executed at the same time because we start with a dialog and we have an end dialog. We have the unbuffered, so we want it all to load. And as I said before, because if we ever hope to get out of the dialog, we need to explicitly code an on-action close or an on-action cancel, and we need to link that to an exit dialog statement. So in this example, I've just used a display array, and I've used two display arrays. I could have an input array, I could have a construct, I could have anything I needed to any of the singular dialogues that we have a flag to be a sub-dialog, I can put inside of these dialog and end dialog statement. At the bottom of the text on this page, there was also a note we have the ui.Dialog class with methods that can be used within interactive dialogs. The ui.Dialog class has methods that you can use either in a multiple dialog or even in a singular dialog. So I just wanted to point that out now, and we will be seeing uses of these classes as we move forward. So when we get to control blocks, there's two control blocks that you can use only with the dialog instruction, so only with the multiple dialogs. You have a before dialog and an after dialog. And just like any of these before and afters, they run once. They're run before dialog when you first go into a dialog statement, and it will be used for initialization. The after dialog is when you leave a dialog statement, and it is used for any cleanup that you need to do. So here I just give you an example of the before dialog statement. It says before dialog, and the first thing I say, call dialog set action active. There's an action named save, and we want to set it to false. Now you should probably be able to interpret now, so my dialog statement has actions defined for it. One of those actions is save, but we're saying here that when we first come in, I want that save action to be set to false. I can use the dialog statement to make that happen because I'm in the dialog. Once I go into the dialog, I can use this dialog prefix, the dialog object, and I can use any of the methods that I have out there in the ui.Dialog class. So the second thing I had in here is the first thing I want to do is set a field active. So I'm setting the cuss status using a function to determine what it's set to, and then if my customer is new, I'm moving the cursor, I'm setting the next field to cuss name. So these are initialization tasks that I wanted to do when I entered this specific dialog. We also have control blocks that you can use inside of the sub-dialogs. The sub-dialogs should be incredibly familiar to you if you've done singular dialogs. So when you think about coding an input statement, you can, or an input dialog, you can use those same control blocks in your input. For the most part, what you do normally for an input statement, you can do for that input statement when it's a sub-dialog. Same with the construct, same with the display, and so on. So you have your before-after input, before-after construct, you have your before display, after display, before and after field, before and after row, when the row changes, after an insert and after a delete. These are things that you can use inside of your sub-dialogs. Okay, we have a series of actions. We have default actions that are created whenever you use a dialog statement. I pulled this table out of the text. These are the actions that you may want to be aware of and you may want to code for. The insert, append, and delete are going to be relevant to arrays that you've put up there. The next row, previous, first row, and last row are only going to be valid if you have a display or input array, but it's putting out to a single record on the form, so it's not inside of a table. A single record with one row. And then you have your find and find next. So these are actions that are going to be out there just because you're using a dialog. If you want to disable any of them, you're going to have to go through the effort to do the disabling. And I've shown you one way that you can avoid some of these. If I'm doing an input array, but I don't want them to be able to insert, append, or delete, I can go ahead and set attributes to turn these off. So this input array is not going to allow the insert, the append, or the delete. Chances are you'll want one of those if you're actually doing this. So this is just to show you the way that you can go about making this happen. You could also, of course, then use your set action active and turn and insert and update and delete on or off. So that's different ways that you can manage the default action views or actions that are put out for you. So identifying subdialogs by name. So there may be times that you need to identify a subdialog. And the way we do that depends on whether it's an input or display array, or whether it's an input array or display array, or whether it's an input or a construct. So if it's an input or a display array, you identify it by using the name of the screen record that you're going to. So if I wanted to refer to this check action right here, inside of this display array statement, the way I would do it is to use the nomenclature of sord, which is the name of the screen array, dot check, the name of the action. If we look down input and construct, however, I need to change the side so this says input array / display array. But here, if it's either an input or a construct, I need to actually explicitly give it a name. So here, if we want to be able to refer to it later, we need to give it an attribute. That attribute uses the keyword name, and then you make it equal to what you want it to be called. And then if I need to reference this specific check action, I would then use account.check. And then later, if I'm going, let's say I'm putting a button on a form, if I wanted that button to refer to this guy right here, I would set the action to account.check. If I wanted to refer to this display, I would set it to sord.check. Let me clear my marker. So here we try to show an example of where somebody has written a dialog and used the same action in 3 different locations. So in this dialog, they've created a zoom action. One zoom action is for when they're within the state field in the input statement that has the name of an account. So that's one action they have out there. Also in that same input statement, they have a zoom that should take place, that should be the action called if we're in this statement, yet we're not in the state field. And finally, inside of the dialog itself, they have an action zoom, which means we're not in the input statement, we're inside the dialog, we're somewhere else, and we somehow execute this action zoom. So there's 3 different dialogs out here. Let's see if I have a... do I have a text tool? I do not have a text tool. So if I was going to refer to these, then for my input by name, if I'm inside of the state field, I would be able, and I'll type this in the chat window, I could use account.state.zoom. So that would be the way that I would refer to that specific instance of my action. If I wanted to refer to the action zoom inside of the input that's named account, but not in the state field, I would just use account.zoom. And if I just wanted to refer to the action outside of my input by name, I would just use the term zoom. And then the program, depending upon where you're on in the form, it knows when that zoom is hit, whether it's account.state.zoom, whether it's account.zoom, or whether it's zoom. It knows which one to kick off. So it's a way that you can determine how to handle conflicting actions where you have the same action name in different parts of your dialog. The recommended coding technique is to, instead of relying on this type of system, although it will work, is to just give them different names. And that way there is no confusion in your code. You know when you're hitting one action versus when you're hitting another action. So here we have a example using the sub-dialog action. So I have my dialog. I have it opening up two display arrays. So I have my SR1 display array. I have my SR2 display array. I have my on action that's calling some sort of setup. When I go into this setup, it's passing in a dialog. So I've left the dialog itself to go to a function. I have to pass in a dialog handle. And inside of this dialog, it's calling my dialog.setActionHidden. It wants the insert. This was the default action for this display array. It wants to set it equal to 1. So it wants to hide it. So only for the very first screen array, it's going to go and it's going to hide that insert statement, or it's hide that insert default action. So here's one where we have no choice but to use the nomenclature because this is a default action. It's not one that we defined. So we have an on insert that caused the insert or the insert action to be made. If we want to refer to it and differentiate it from my SR2, I have to do SR_1.insert. And here I can turn it off. Let me see if I've set that up inside of my D4A. So, my multiple dialog. So here I'm doing a multiple dialog. I've defined my dynamic array 1. I've defined my dynamic array 2. I populate both of my arrays. And then here I had my dialog. So I had my display array that I can set up. I had a second display array that I set up. I have my before dialog statement, which sets up a before dialog. Okay, here I am dialog setup. I pass in the dialog, and here I'm going to turn off the hidden. So let's just check and see and make sure this works. So if I execute this, let me set as I execute this application. Oh, and I'm doing it inside of my web browser. You'll notice that if I'm on this dialog, I have no insert button because I had turned it off. If I go to this dialog button, my insert button appears. Let me close out of my dialog. I'm going to switch over to desktop for presentation. And the reason it disappeared is because I had my action hidden. I pointed to which dialog I'm talking about, and I said I wanted the insert, I wanted hidden to be true. Let me go ahead and set hidden to false. I'll save my change. I'll execute it again. It's going to compile and execute. And this time my insert button appears regardless of which of these dialogues I'm in, my insert button appears. So some things that are specific to the dialog instruction. Oop. I have a note that I should show my message. Okay, so right now I just want to show you something. So if I'm inside of my dialog here, I'm in 5.105. You notice I have a note that says current item is SR1. So that's my screen record here. If I go here, I have a message displaying current item is SR2. If I'm inside of this dialog and I click My Message, it says Dialog Action Executed in Display Array SR2. If I go over here, click My Message, it says that I'm in Display Array SR1. So why is this My Message button telling me these things? Let me go and look at my code and see what it is I was trying to let you know. Okay, so inside of my Display Array SR1, I went down and I had an on action My Message saying I want you to display that this was executed. And down here on action My Message, I want you to display that this is executed. In this, you'll note in this message, you'll notice that I use the term dialog.getCurrentItem. So that's how I'm getting the fact that I am SR1 or I'm in the SR2. So let's see what the so how did I program? Oh, that's it. So I just have My Message, and it knows which My Message to do because it knows which. Well, that actually wasn't as exciting as I thought. So it's just saying, so it's letting me go, and it's showing me what action is there, and it's using the dialog get current item to show me that action. Okay. So ending the dialog. So the dialog does not use the end flag. So one of the things we did when we were in subdialogs or when we were in the singular statements, you could always do like a Control-C. You could set that interrupt flag. A dialog instruction does not use the interrupt flag. It does not create default accept and cancel. You need to go in and you need to force it to exit. You have to implement your own action handler. It's typical that when you do an on-action accept, you're going to pair that with an accept dialog statement. And it's typical that if you're going to do an on-action cancel or an on-action close, you're going to pair that with an exit dialog statement. You don't have to do either, but that's what is traditional to do. That's normal coding practice. The accept dialog will go through and will validate any field changes that you've done out there. So if it fails, then it's going to, if the validation fails, then it's going to go and you're going to try to handle those errors. There's additional dialogue. You can do continue dialogue. So you can say no, stay in the dialogue. You could send if you have an accept dialog. You can, and it's not working, you can have a next field statement that says where they're supposed to go as well. Some code example that we have up here, just showing you some ways. So they have an on-action append, they have some variable set, and then they have an accept dialog. The accept dialog is going to try to validate this. If it doesn't validate, you're going to stay inside of the append. I'm not sure exactly what this code would be doing. I would need to see it inside of the context of its statement. But you can see you can use the accept dialog where you need to. Here's the typical on-action accept. I want to accept a dialog. And then if we go down, on-action cancel, they can do some processing, and then they have an exit dialog statement. So the accept dialog and the exit dialog statements are statements that you're going to want to be explicitly putting in. And according to when I did my sample programs, I would use both on-action close and on-action cancel, and I'd have them both exit dialog. The documentation I was noticing tends to suggest that you'd want to do one or the other, but there's no harm in doing both. So that's a lot of the base of working with multiple dialogues. We will go into multi-row select in a minute, but right now we're going to look a little bit about the ui.Dialog class. ui.Dialog is an interface to interactive instructions. It allows you to manipulate your dialog behavior. It controls the behavior of the interactive instruction. We give a keyword dialog that you can use as long as you're in the dialog. It represents the current dialog object. So as long as you're inside of a singular dialog or a dialog statement, you are able to execute methods of this class. You don't have to declare a ui.Dialog variable. You can just use the word dialog as we show here in its capital. We always write it in capital letters. I don't think it's required to be in capitals. I've never tried otherwise. I've just thought of that right now. But I'm standard to type it in capital letters. And then it knows that you're referring to the dialog that you are inside. It cannot appear outside of the dialog block. And so I think I showed you that bit of code earlier. If I wanted to use a dialog method outside of my dialog block, I'm going to then have to create a ui.Dialog variable. I'm going to have to and use that ui.Dialog variable to represent the dialog in any function that's outside of the dialog block. We show that here. So on this one, we have our action inside of the dialog itself. I can tell that I should have a dialog here because there's an end dialog statement. I want to call this setup routine, and I need to pass it my dialog object reference. So inside of my routine, it defines a variable of the type ui.Dialog. I pass into that variable, and then I call my method using that variable instead of using the word dialog all in caps. So this is how I get it to work when I'm passing that dialog as a reference to a function that sits outside of the dialog. So here are two dialog class methods. The first, the getCurrent method, that's getting returning the current dialog object. So I can do a ui.Dialog.getCurrent. It's going to return the current dialog object. All right. You'll notice that I had to I couldn't just use a dialog keyword here because I'm in a function that's outside of a dialog statement. The other one we have, the set default unbuffered, sets the unbuffered attribute globally for all dialog instructions. So in the dialog that I showed on a slide earlier, I had set the attribute equal to unbuffered. If you want to have all your dialogs be unbuffered without having to set the attribute, you can call this ui.Dialog.setDefaultUnbuffered and set it to true, and you would call this at the start of your program. That 0 there shouldn't be there. Just ignore that 0. So the dialog class provides methods to manage arrays, to support multi-row select, control the behavior of interactive instruction, find forms, put focus on forms, interact with the form fields, disable and enable actions. Those are the things that we're able to do out here with this dialog class. We're going to have you use a lot of examples, or use some examples to go through and try these different dialog methods. So if you want to enable and disable actions, you're going to use setActionActive. In the lab, I have you set these actions that we've created, move 1 and move 2. I have you turn them on and off using enable and disable action functions. And you basically put in the name of the action, and you either set it to true or false. Handling default action view visibility. So this is, instead of making them active or inactive, you just don't give people the ability to see them. And the way we do that is we can use the setActionHidden. In the setActionHidden, I can say what the action is, and I can say it's either visible or it's not visible, or it's either hidden or it's not hidden. So I can setActionHidden set to 1 means that you're making it invisible. SetActionHidden and set to 0 means you're letting it show again. And here you can see we're using that nomenclature where we've identified an action within a subdialog by using the dot notation. There's ways for identifying fields within a dialog method. You can identify the fields by using things like get current item, get form, what is the form being used, get the field buffer, what is the input buffer of the identified field, get field touch, it'll return either a true or false if there is a touch flag. Next field tells you the name of the next field to get focus, or registers the name of the next field to get focus. If you want to set a field active or set it inactive, you can go ahead and use that set field active, provide the field name, and provide it with a 0 or a 1. You can also modify the touch flag. Has the field been touched? You can give it a field name, and you can turn that on or off. Now, when we get into providing field names, anywhere it says field or field list, you can give a field name, you can give a table name.field name, you can give a screen record name.field name. You can use the term form only.field name. So if you don't provide the detail and there's multiple fields with the same name, the first form field matching that name is going to be used. So ideally, if you have like two fields out there with the same name on your form, you're going to go ahead and you're going to give us the full name by including either its table name or its screen record name on as part of the name that you're using in the function. We also have a series of methods out here that we use to manage arrays. I'm not going to walk through all of these. I've listed it here. This is a table that I created out of the book. But we have all the details about these methods inside of the book. But you can append rows, delete rows. You can get the length of the array. You can find out what row you're on. You can specify a row to be that current row. You can change the decoration attributes of your array. These are things that allow you to manipulate basically the DOM tree that creates that array. So you have the ability to go in there and use these functions to manage your arrays and manage your rows. I want us to go back to the using some of these ui.Dialog methods to do what we call a multiple row select. So first, let me show you what a multiple row select is talking about. In your lab, you're going to be building something called mDialogs. You're also going to be building something called mDialogs MRS. I'm going to set this as my default application, and I'm going to execute this application. Okay. And so what I've done here is right now I have by default we have what's known as a singular row select. I can hold down my control key and I can move around, nothing happens. I can hold down the shift key, I move around, nothing happens. By default, when I'm in a display array, it's putting out there and you can only select a single row at a time. You can set it up, however, that you can have a multi-row select. So I've gone and I've set up I've set up my thing so I can switch it from single row select to multi-row select. Now that I have multi-row select, if I hold down my control key, it allows me to pick multiple rows at one time. If I hold down my shift key, it allows me to select a range of rows. And once I've selected them, I can drag these things as a group. If I needed to put them in another application, if I needed to move them somewhere. We have you actually set up to be able to move these back and forth by using actions. So I don't have the drag and drop implemented on this form, but I have actions that allow me to move them back and forth. If I can do multiple row select, you'll notice on both sides. If I disable it, I've turned it off, and now I'm back to only being able to select one row despite holding either control or holding shift while I click on these rows. So that's the concept of a multiple row select. In order to make a multiple row select happen, we provided three methods out there. You have the setSelection mode, and that's where you turn the multiple row select on or off. So it says selection mode, there's really one. It's either you are in single row select or you are in multiple row select. If you set it equal to 1, you're turning on multiple row selection. And then as we're doing that, you can have this concept of is a row selected. If I'm using the control key and going up and down, I may be selecting multiple rows. We need to have a flag that says is the row selected. We then need to have a method to see whether that row is selected. And then we have this concept of setting a selection range. Well, what if I want to go through and say I want rows 3 through 7? I have a method out there that allows me to select those rows programmatically instead of clicking. Now, as far as users doing it, they're doing it the ways that I'm used to doing it with any other applications I have out there. If I want to select a range of rows, I know that I have to do Shift and click. If I want to pick individual rows, I know I have to use the control key and select each row that I want. So the first one, how do I turn a specific screen array into a multiple row select? I use my setSelection mode, and I identify the name of the sub-dialog, or the name of the array that I'm wanting to deal with, I'm wanting to turn it on for, and then I set the value equal to 1. If I wanted to turn it off for screen array 1, I would use the call dialog.setSelection mode. I'd say screen array 1, and I would set it equal to 0. Notice I'm not doing it for the dialog overall. I have to do it for each screen that I want. I need to go ahead and call the setSelection mode for that screen array. So the way I tend to do it, and I'm not sure if when you download the files today, you're going to see there's two sets of solutions. There's one that I called solutions, and the others I believe I called solutions improved. The solutions were the ones that were created by the course developer. I have my own programming methods, and I think that it may be a little bit cleaner, so I've gone ahead and loaded up my solutions, which I call solutions improved. One of the things I like to do is I like to have my setup function. So if I'm going to set up multiple row select, and we have, whenever you see MRS or misses, that's our shorthand for multiple row select. I like to have it all in a function that does the setup. So when I do this on action MRS, that's where I trigger an action saying I want multiple row select. I have it go and I have it call my setup routine, and I pass it my dialog handle, my dialog object, and in my setup routine, this is where I have my setSelection mode. I list all the screen arrays I want to be involved, and I set the multiple row select equal to 1. If I want to turn off, I want to have an on action MRS disable. I would have another function called MRS setup disable. Again, pass it the dialog. It would be a separate function where I would go in and I would have the statements needed to turn it off. When you're dealing with multiple row select, we do have the concept of a selected row versus a current row. The selected rows, I think the text in this page, when you print out the PDF, will tell you that by default it's blue, and the current row by default has a little dotted line around it, and I think here the state, I believe that's a dotted line around it in this screenshot. You'll notice on the application I run, I've changed the styles so that they're all pink, or they're all whatever that color is, so that you can use a style to change what shows a selected row. When a row is selected, there is a flag on it that says that row is selected. So you can check to see is a row current versus is a row selected. If you're not in multiple row select, then the current row is always the selected row. If you are in multiple row select, you can have selected rows that are not the current row. You can have a current row that's not the selected row if you go and you've turned it off. So you've clicked it and then you've clicked it again to turn it off. That's still the current row, but it is no longer selected. So just realize that there's a difference between what a selected row is and what a current row is when you're in multiple row select mode. So if you want to check that a current row is selected, you would use the isRowSelected method. So here on action check current row selected, it's saying if dialog.isRowSelected, and then they're passing in the current row. Here's how I got my current row. I'm passing in that current row for the screen array. Is it selected? If it is, then it's going to give me a message, current row is selected. Don't know why this function wants to know that, but here's a function that'll it'll go and it just checks to see whether your current row is indeed a row that is selected. I think it's just a good example to show you how to use this isRowSelected function. Here's a better example, and in this example we're using this isRowSelected to see if a row selection flag has been set. And the reason they were doing it inside of this example, and you're going to be taking some of this code for later, is we have a list over here and we have a list over here. We want to move these, we want to select certain rows, and then we want to move them by pressing the move button. We've created an action that causes the move to happen. So what happens when we click this move button? It's going to go down and it's going to run a function like this. So we have an array that we're coming from, and we have an array that we're going to. On this array that we're coming from, it's saying, well, first let me go ahead and get the length of this list, and for this list, I'm going to cycle through each row. Now, if a row is selected, so I'm starting at the first row, if that row is selected, then I want you to append that row to my receiving array. I need to append a row to the receiving array. I need to get the cursor to that row, and then I need to move I need to set my to array equal to the value of the from array. So I've created an empty row at the end. I've set my cursor to point to that row. I then populate that row with the values from the from array, and then I go back to my from array, and I need to delete that row that I've just moved over. And at this point, I'm taking that row out. I need to go and I need to move my array down one, so that I in fact end up moving to the next row on the list. This function works for a multiple row select. If you look at my sample code, after you do your labs, if you want to go and look at my sample code, you'll see that I've added additional functionality in here where I do a test to see whether I'm in a single row select or whether I'm in a multiple row select before I use this function to handle both cases. And we can talk about why I do that tomorrow if you like, but just want to point that out here if you want to do a comparison after your labs today. But this is an example of, well, I'm moving from A to B. I need to know what rows are selected here, and the way I find out what rows are selected here is I use this isRowSelected method. Once I've identified a row as being selected, then I go through the code I need to move it from side A to side B. So you can also programmatically change the selection flag for a range of rows. So the selection flag is either a true or a false. If you have a method, let's say you want to go through and select all rows. Oh, I know why. I was like, why would you ever want to do that? What if I click on this button here? This button, sorry, let me put my spotlight. This button right here typically says move all rows over if you have the double arrows. This type of double arrows means move all rows back. So if you want to do this, the user hasn't selected them all. You just want to select all the rows for that user. That would be a good instance of coming here and saying, okay, what I want to do is I want to select all rows. So I call for my dialog, set the selection range. I tell it what the array I'm talking about. I say 1 to -1 means move through every row in the array. If I wanted to move through the first 5 rows, I would say 1 through 5. But if I want to say move through every row, I say 1 to -1, and then I set the value equal to 1, so in other words, set it to true. If I want to unselect all rows, again, tell it what array I'm dealing with. Here's my 1 to -1 is my nomenclature for selecting all, and then I set it equal to 0, and that turns off the flag. That is how we handle a multi-row select. So if I go into my multi-row select, let's see if there's anything that I'd want to point out here. Here I've created a variable outside of my main module, so I created a global variable. I define MR. So MR, I have a Boolean that says I'm in a multiple record or I'm not in a multiple record. I then have my main module where I define my 2 arrays, and I have my I and my size as integers. Let's see, I open some forms, I populate my arrays, and here I have my dialog statement. It's an unbuffered because I want it to react. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to delete. And then I display my arrays. My display array statements are typical display array statements. I have a second display array statement. I don't think there's anything special about that. And here you'll have, notice I have a before dialog statement, and here by default I disable multi-row selection, and I pass in my dialog. I have my cancel statement because you always need to have a cancel or a close if you ever hope to exit. And then I have an action enable MRS. I have an action disable MRS. Now I wonder what the difference is between. Oh, I call it before dialog. I can also turn it off again. And then I have my action moves, where if I'm moving rows from one side to another, or I'm moving rows from screen array A1 to 2. On my move 2, I'm moving rows from screen array 2 to 1. And here I have my function enable multi-row select. Now in your lab, you're going to see you only do a couple things. I think I have you change selection modes or something. I've gone ahead and I've said, well, I want to hide actions if I'm enabling multi-row select. I just want to be able to move stuff back and forth. Is that what I actually did? So let's execute that and see. Okay. So that's the old one. Let me execute my. Yeah, so if I enable multi-row select, you can see I took off all of these guys. I just want them to move rows back and forth. Why, I'm not sure. I think I was just playing around. If I disable it, then I had these actions appear again. So here I just wanted to try some active hidden, active move 1 and 2. So apparently I turn on and off my move buttons. Let me see that happen. Yeah, so if I'm in the single row, I don't allow them to move. It's only when I'm in the multiple row that I allow them to move. And I've done that by setting my action active on and off. So my disable multi-row selection, you can see I've done similar things. I think I was just wanting to work out and use the different nomenclature for specifying the insert for the screen array 1 versus the insert for screen array 2, etc. And then inside of my moving, when I'm moving from A to B, you'll notice I pass in which array I'm coming from and which array I'm going to. Which screen record I'm coming from, which screen record I'm going to, which array I'm coming from, which array I'm going to. And then I have the code that we had walked through on the slide. The only thing I did different is I've added a clause here where I say if I'm not in multiple record, then I don't want to augment this cursor and continue to move rows. It took me a while to figure this one out. If you're in a singular array, your current row, if you're in a single row select, you're not in multiple row select, then the current row is always the selected row. So once you start moving the row, if you start subtracting numbers, your current row keeps on resetting that flag, and you keep moving self across when you're in a single row select. So in a single row select, I needed to make sure I wasn't executing this last line. In a multi-row select, I do want to execute this line because I wanted to cycle through all the rows and check all the flags for every row. So that's why I had to add this code to mine so that I could reuse this function regardless of whether I was on a single row select or whether I was in a multi-row select. I don't think you get to that in our labs. If you do, it's going to be by you just playing around outside of what the lab officially tells you to do. But I did give you the solution so that you can walk through this on your own. And you can test it out. You can try saying, okay, well, what happens up here when I have my move buttons active for both enabled and disabled multi-row effect? Does it still work for me? Okay, that's what I needed to cover about multiple dialogues and using the ui.Dialog class methods. Do we have any questions out there right now? I will unmute. And you can also use your chat window. Are there any questions people have currently? Okay, I don't have any questions coming through the chat window, and I don't see any hands up. So let's go ahead and we're going to take a break. It is, I have 57 after, so we'll go ahead and let's get back at 10 after the hour. So everybody take a 13-minute break. We'll get back at 10 after the hour. Thank you.